Hey, you. You're finally awake.
The Nintendo 64 had some of the most groundbreaking and beloved games of all time. From the revolutionary world of Super Mario 64 to the legendary Journey and Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, the system managed to give us unforgettable experiences. But for every classic, there's a dud, and the N64 had its share of games that fell far short of expectations. Today we're diving deep into the worst of the worst. 7 games so poorly made, so broken, so baffling, they've become notorious for all the wrong reasons. And as always, if you think there are games I've missed on this list, put them in here and we can always do a part 3. Before we do get into the list, if you think I deserve it, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content. It really helps the channel. We've got a weekly podcast where this week we're covering Gunstar Heroes for the Sega Mega Drive, and we've also got a $1 a month Patreon where you can join the Smut Squad, add your own comments in, and get involved with your own show. Alright, let's get into it, shall we? 7 of the worst Nintendo 64 games, Part 2. Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. Now, Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue for the N64 should have been a kid's dream come true. Released in 2000, the game rode upon the popularity of the Power Rangers franchise, specifically the Lightspeed Rescue series that aired on the television at the time. Now, I love the Power Rangers, I was a huge fan when I was a kid. Fans were excited at the prospect of donning the suits of their favourite heroes, piloting the Zords, and battling monsters to save the day. But what they got was one of the most lifeless, uninspired action games ever released on the platform. Unlike its PlayStation counterpart, which offered the FMVs and slightly more varied gameplay, the N64 version felt like an incomplete shell. The game loosely follows the show's premise, but narrative elements are barely present. You're given a mission briefing in the form of scrolling text and robotic voiceovers, and then thrown into bland environments with vague directive of saving people or fighting off threats. There's no development, no character moments, and certainly no effort to capture the drama of the series. Gameplay is the core of any action game, and Lightspeed Rescue utterly fails in that department. Each mission plays out as a dull, repetitive sequence of on-foot brawling and vehicle-based objectives. The combat mechanics are as shallow as a puddle. Basic punch and kick combos with zero feedback or finesse. Enemies stand around like mannequins and sometimes walking into walls and occasionally remember, oh yeah, we're meant to attack the player. The lack of challenge here is matched only by the lack of fun. The controls are also particularly offensive. Moving your ranger feels like you're drunk. There is a notable delay between button input and action which kills any sense of responsiveness. Jumping is absolutely a joke and often leading to failed platforming segments that feel tacked on. Worst of all, the camera frequently gets stuck behind walls or angles itself in a way that obstructs your view entirely, which is absolutely great when you're trying to play a video game. Thanks, camera. Graphics are another sore spot. Even by N64 standards, Lightspeed Rescue looks like an early gen tech demo. The characters are blocky and indistinguishable from each other, with rangers looking like vaguely coloured blobs. The environments are just crap, reusing the same textures repeatedly with no sense of atmosphere. Explosions and special effects are pitiful, failing to sell the over-the-top nature of the franchise, and that's what Power Rangers is, absolute chaos. The game also features the Zord segments, but these are somehow even worse than the on-foot missions. You pilot a Megazord in giant, slow-motion battles that feel like an underwater sumo wrestling. There's no sense of impact when any attacks land. All the enemies behave the same, and it should have been a highlight, and it just ends up being another disappointing chore. And that's the thing, the Megazord battles are meant to be the coolest bit at the end of the battle. Come on, we all know Power Rangers. Even the sound design is lacking. It's like the entire sound development team went, right, we've got a party at 5 o'clock, and if we can get that done, the beers are on me. So how long have we got? 20 minutes? Yeah, that'll do. Could just throw something in the can. That's exactly what it feels like. Reviews at the time were harsh but fair. Good old IGN gave this game a scathing review, citing its poor gameplay, graphics, and general laziness, and gave it a 7. I don't know, they probably did. Fans of the show were left disillusioned, with many calling it one of the worst licensed games on the system. It sold poorly and was quickly forgotten. The legacy of Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue is one of bitter disappointment. It's only remembered today in lists like these, and a cautionary tale for not using just brand recognition to sell a product, actually make a good Power Rangers game. Carmageddon 64. Now, Carmageddon 64 is a game that lives in infamy, not because it was a misunderstood gem, because it represents one of the most embarrassing console ports in gaming history. Originally a PC cult classic known for its vehicle violence and arcanic energy, Carmageddon was never a masterpiece, but it had a certain gritty charm. When it came to the N64 in 2000, all that charm was stripped away, leaving behind a mangled, unplayable wreck. From the outset, it was clear that Carmageddon 64 had been heavily censored. The PC version allows you to mow down pedestrians in bloody fashion for points, but on the N64, due to Nintendo's stricter content policies, the pedestrians turned to zombies or robots, and the blood was swapped out for green ooze. While this censorship alone might not have ruined the game, it was the least of its problems. Like, why even release it? Why release this game? What made you think, oh, we've got to censor it heavily? What's the point? Ugh. The game's core premise, the violent races where you destroy other cars or complete laps to win, remained intact. The execution was so broken that the game could barely function. The driving physics was some of the worst ever seen in a racing game. Cars handled like bars of soap, there was no traction, weight or consistency. Turning a corner became a gamble, like literally gamble with your lives, with frequent spinning, flipping or outright freezing of controls. Graphically, the game is an absolute mess. The draw distance is laughable, with the good old heavy fog mechanic masking almost everything in front of you. The textures are terrible and the car models are crudely designed with barely any details. The environments just lack any variety, with many tracks seem devoid of objects or design, making them feel empty or unfinished. Again, it's another, we've got 20 minutes, let's see what we can do. The frame rate is shockingly poor. Even in single player, the game chugs along at what feels like 10 frames per second. Add another player into split screen mode and you're looking at a slideshow. Combined with poor controls, this makes the game nearly impossible to enjoy or even tolerate. Audio design is equally dreadful. The sound effects are weak and don't often match the on-screen action. Engines sound like blenders on their last legs, and crashes are accompanied by the same metallic thud over and over. The music is just generic and forgettable, doing nothing to enhance the gameplay. Mission objectives are often unclear, with the HUD providing little useful information. The AI behaves erratically, and the rubber banding here is extreme, making races feel unfair and frustrating. Critical reception was universally negative. Reviewers lambasted the game for its technical issues, uninspired gameplay, and total lack of polish. Even fans of the original Carmageddon felt betrayed by what they described as an insult to the series, as it frequently tops lists of the worst N64 games and is held up as an example of how not to port a PC game to console. Carmageddon 64 legacy is one of failure. It didn't just disappoint, it actively angered those who played it. In the years since, it's become a punchline in the gaming community. Few games managed to mess up on so many levels simultaneously, but Carmageddon 64 is a masterclass in how to ruin a franchise's reputation in one fell swoop. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. Now, Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker is based off the animated film of the same name, and it should have been a slam dunk for fans of the DC animated universe. Released in 2000, it promised players the chance to step in the high-tech suit of Terry McGinnis, the futuristic Batman mentored by the aging Bruce Wayne. With a dark-toned cyberpunk setting and one of Batman's greatest villains returning, the premise was solid. But in execution, the game was an unmitigated disaster, bland, repetitive, and offensively dull. The game loosely follows the plot of the animated movie, with the Joker seemingly resurrected and terrorizing Neo Gotham. However, the storytelling in the game is minimal and handled with static images and brief lines of text. There's no voice acting from the show's acclaimed cast, so no Kevin Conroy and no Mark Hamill. No animated cutscene, and very little effort was put into making the story engaging. It feels less cinematic experience and more of a lazy, disconnected series of levels. Gameplay is where everything just goes to shit. Batman Beyond is a beat 'em up in the most reductive sense of the word. Each level consists of walking from left to right, punching endless waves of identical thugs, and occasionally jumping across poorly designed gaps. The combo system is nearly non-existent, attacks lack any impact, and every enemy behaves the same. There's no strategy here, no progression, and no variation, and again, you just look at Streets of Rage 2 and go, copy that, put Batman on it. The game features multiple Batsuits with different abilities, which is cool, strength, agility, speed, but these changes seem to be purely cosmetic. In practice, the suit just feels exactly the same, and the enemies are so generic it doesn't matter what you wear. Weapons can be picked up, but they're so clunky to use, and often disappear before you can even land a hit. Visually, Batman Beyond is a disgrace. Character models are blocky, animation is stilted, and the environments are repetitive and lifeless. Every level just looks the same, a dark corridor or alleyway with minimal detail. Neo Gotham, which could have been a visually stunning dystopia, is reduced to a series of dull grey rooms and industrial backgrounds. The controls are unresponsive and awkward. The hit detection is poor, and jumping feels like a leap of faith every time. Enemies frequently glitch into walls or hover off the ground. You're fighting not just a gang of villains, but also the game engine itself. The soundtrack is equally uninspired. There's no atmospheric tension, no memorable tracks, just droning electronic loops that don't reflect the tone of the show or the intensity of a Batman adventure. Reviews at the time were universally negative. Critics called it boring, sloppy, and a waste of the license. Fans of the show are particularly angry, as the game felt like a cheap cash-in rather than a celebration of the series. It didn't sell well, and it quickly disappeared from store shelves. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker is often remembered as one of the most wasted opportunities on the N64. With such rich source material, it could have been a dark, compelling action game. Instead, it's a mind-numbing slog that insults the intelligence of the players. And that's a shame, because I love Batman, and I love Batman Beyond. I thought it was an absolute incredible series. I've watched it from start to finish when I was a kid, and still praise it as one of the best. And I still think this film is one of the best animated films I've ever done. Now, its legacy of the game is one of disappointment and unfilled potential. The movie remains a fan favourite, as it should, but the game adaptation is best forgotten. A glaring example of even if you get the best license, it can be squandered from lazy design and poor execution. I'm talking about poor execution. Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero. Midway tried to spin off one of the most popular characters into a standalone story. Enter Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero, a game that attempts to blend classic 2D fighting with side-scrolling action-adventure. Released in 1987 on the PlayStation and later ported onto the N64, the game was meant to deepen the backstory of Sub-Zero. What players got instead was an exercise in frustration, with clunky mechanics, unfair level design, and a complete betrayal of what made Mortal Kombat fun in the first place. The story follows Sub-Zero, the first Sub-Zero, Bi-Han, as he's hired by sorcerer Quan Chi to steal a sacred mat from a Shaolin temple. As the game progresses, Sub-Zero uncovers a web of deception and learns about his role in the larger cosmic conflict. On paper, it sounds like the perfect opportunity to give depth to one of Mortal Kombat's most beloved characters, but the execution is so poor that most players may never made it past the first few levels. Although it should be noted, as a Mortal Kombat fan, Bi-Han is a dick. Yes, the original Sub-Zero is an absolute dickhead. He's not a nice guy, so he shouldn't really get his own backstory because he's an absolute penis. There, I said it. The gameplay is an awkward mix of fighting and platforming. The controls, while suitable in a traditional one-on-one fighting game, are a complete disaster in a side-scrolling context. You have to use different button combinations for turning round, blocking, and executing special moves, but these inputs are delayed and unresponsive, and the tiniest misstep can result in instant death thanks to poorly telegraphed traps and bottomless pits. One of the game's most infamous mechanics is how it repurposes Mortal Kombat's combo system for a platforming adventure. The game expects you to chain attacks together with fighting game precision while jumping across collapsing ledges and dodging traps. It feels like you're trying to play Street Fighter 2 inside a Prince of Persia level, and the results are absurd as shit as you think. The N64 version here is particularly bad. It lacks the full motion video cutscenes from the PlayStation version, removing what little cinematic flair the game thought it was going to have. In their place are blurry static images that do nothing to immerse the player. On top of that, the textures are downgraded and the frame rate is less stable, and the sound design suffers due to the cartridge limitations. Level design is also another sore point. Traps are placed in unfair positions with no warning or chance to react, although in reality, that's how a trap should work. However, this is a game, we're going to move past that. Enemies will spawn behind you and interrupt you mid-jump, often knocking onto spikes or off platforms. Checkpoints are rare here, meaning that every death sends you back to the beginning of a punishing level. The learning curve isn't steep, it's a vertical wall lined with razor blades. Boss fights should also be the highlight of any Mortal Kombat title, but here they feel like an endurance test. The hit detection is inconsistent, and boss spam unblockable moves, making your abilities feel severely limited. It turns what should be a battle of skill into a repetitive and unfair slog. Even the music and sound effects are typically the strength in Mortal Kombat games are just bland and forgettable here in Mythologies. The iconic voiceovers and brutal sound effects are missing, replaced by generic action game noises and uninspired soundtrack. Critics were divided on the PlayStation version, but almost universally panned the N64 port. Players were confused, disappointed, and often angry at the gameplay decisions. What was intended as a bold new direction for the franchise quickly became a punchline. Instead of celebrating Sub-Zero's legacy, the game completely tarnished it. Today, Mortal Kombat Mythologies Sub-Zero is remembered as a failed experiment, an ambitious idea executed without the necessary finesse or design discipline. It's a prime example of why fighting game characters don't always make the successful leap into other genres. For Mortal Kombat fans, it remains an embarrassing chapter in the saga of one of the franchise's coolest ninjas. WCW Nitro, with classics like WWF No Mercy and WCW NWO Revenge setting the standard of what wrestling simulations could achieve. Unfortunately, WCW Nitro, ported from the PlayStation's N64 in 1999, did everything wrong. Rather than building on the technical excellence and deep gameplay of its peers, it delivered a shallow, clunky mess that stands one of the worst wrestling games of its time. Originally developed by Inland Productions, WCW Nitro began its life on the PlayStation, where it was already seen as mediocre. The port to the N64 didn't just carry over the flaws, it made them even worse. The game features a basic exhibition mode, tag team matches, and a limited roster of WCW talent. The story, or what little of it there is, amounts to nothing more than a series of disconnected matches. There's no career mode, no championship progression, and no wrestler-specific rivalries or storylines. Considering how dramatic WCW programming was during this era, the lack of any narrative engagement is baffling. And to be fair, it was. WCW vs WWF was an amazing time back in those things, being a kid in the 90s. It was quality, we all loved the war. The gameplay is where WCW Nitro completely collapses. Matches are controlled through an awkward, unresponsive system that relies heavily on complicated button combinations. Moves are hard to pull off consistently, and grapples are delayed or missed entirely due to poor hit detection. Wrestlers often clip through one another or fall through the ring ropes. Animations are stiff, unconvincing, and lack any sort of spectacle fans expect from professional wrestling. Character models are crude and barely resemble their real-life counterparts. Icons like Sting, Goldberg, sorry, I'll stop, and Kevin Nash are reduced to blocky, distorted figures, with dead-eye stares and jerky movements. The ring environments are equally lifeless, with blurry textures and poor lighting that drain the excitement from every match. The game fails to capture even a hint of the visual flair that made WCW's actual broadcast so engaging. Controls are also another massive issue. The N64's button layout is awkwardly utilised, and executing basic moves feels like entering cheat codes. The game lacks those innovative control schemes that titles like WWF No Mercy perfected. This leads to a steep, frustrating learning curve that makes even friendly matches feel like chores. To make matters worse, the audio is just terrible. Commentary is entirely absent, replaced by repetitive grunts and muffled sound effects. There's little crowd noise to speak of, and the music just loops intensely with no variation. There's almost no replay value here. The limited match type, small roster, and lack of unlockables means that players have seen everything the game has to offer within an hour or two. There's no motivation to return here, especially when compared to extensive customization and depth that were offered by other wrestling games on the console. Critics and fans alike were disappointed. The game was widely panned in reviews for being a lazy port with outdated mechanics. While the WCW brand had strong name recognition, even die-hard wrestling fans couldn't look past the technical flaws and lack of content. Sales were weak, and the game was quickly overshadowed by far superior alternatives. Today, WCW Nitro is remembered as a massive missed opportunity. It failed to capitalise on the wrestling boom of the late 90s and serves a stark reminder of how poorly licensed games can turn out if they're rushed or handled carelessly. It's a title best left in the dustbin of wrestling history. Castlevania 64. Now, Castlevania 64 was meant to usher the legendary vampire hunting franchise onto the third dimension, bringing the haunting world of Dracula's castle to life on Nintendo's new powerhouse console. Released in early 1999, developed by Konami, expectations were sky highs. The series had thrived on the NES and the SNES with tight controls, memorable music, and atmospheric level design. But when Castlevania made its leap to 3D on the N64, the transition was anything but smooth. From the beginning, Castlevania 64 suffered from a confusing development cycle. It was originally envisioned as a far more expansive project with multiple playable characters, branching paths, and a full day-night cycle. But as deadlines loomed and limitations piled up, many of these ideas were scrapped and underdeveloped. The result was a game that felt half-finished, missing key features and polish that could have elevated to its classic status. Players could choose between two protagonists, Reinhardt Schneider, a whip-wielding descendant of the Belmont clan, and Carrie Fernandez, a young girl with magical powers. Both had distinct stories and paths through the castle and a promising idea in theory. However, their gameplay differences were mostly superficial, and the level designs remained largely identical. Worse yet, both characters were saddled with frustrating platforming and awkward combat mechanics. One of the biggest issues here was the camera. The game frequently forced players into tight 3D platforming sections, but the fixed and rotating camera angles often obscured jumps, making it incredibly easy to fall to your death. This was especially egregious in areas with instant death pitfalls or moving platforms. Players had to fight both Dracula's minions and the camera system, which proved to be a far deadlier foe. Combat was also another sticking point. Attacks felt sluggish and lacked the weight you think they would, enemies often soaked up multiple hits with little feedback, and Reinhardt's whip had a limited range and slow wind-up. Carrie's magic was slightly more forgiving, but it came with a cost of weaker defense and long charging animations. Boss battles, which should have been the highlight, were either frustratingly difficult or laughably easy due to poor AI behaviour. Graphically, the game was also uneven. Some environments, like the outer walls of the castle were a garden maze, featured decent atmosphere and lighting, but most textures were blurry and the character models were angular and lifeless, and the animations were just stiff. The art direction tried to capture gothic horror, but it was hamstrung by the limitations of the N64 hardware and the game's rushed production. Audio did fare a bit better. While it lacked the iconic soundtrack of early Castlevania series, there were still a few haunting melodies that captured the tone of the franchise, and you can still hear these today. Voice acting, where present, was minimal and awkwardly delivered. The game's pacing was also inconsistent. Some levels dragged on far too long, with backtracking and switch-finding puzzles that felt like padding. Others could be completed in minutes. The inclusion of an in-game clock, which altered certain events and endings, was a neat concept, but poorly explained. Without a guide, most players had no idea how their actions even impacted the game's conclusion. Reviews at the time were mixed, with some praise the ambition and atmosphere, while others were harshly critical of the controls and technical issues. Over time, their opinion has only soured. The release of Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, an updated version with additional content, helped smooth over some of the rough edges, but it also highlighted how unfinished the original game truly was. Today, Castlevania 64 is viewed as a noble failure, an important but flawed step in the evolution of a beloved series. While it's not without its fans, it remains one of the most divisive entries in the franchise, and a glaring example of how difficult it was for a 2D series to make the leap to 3D in the early days of the N64. And finally, Quest 64. Now, you guys mentioned this a lot of the comments. Where's Quest 64? Where's Quest 64? Well, here it is. If there's one game that encapsulates missed potential on the N64, it's Quest 64. Marketed as the console's first true RPG, it was supposed to be Nintendo's answer to PlayStation's dominant RPG offerings like Final Fantasy VII and Suikoden. Ha! Released in 1998 and developed by Imagineer, Quest 64, known as Holy Magic Century in Europe, offered a colourful world and magic-based combat system, but what could have been a defining genre title for the console ended up as one of its most disappointing. You play as Brian. Brilliant. A young apprentice wizard on a quest to find his missing father and stop an evil force threatening the kingdom of Keltland. The story is about as thin as it sounds. Unlike the narrative-rich RPGs of the era, Quest 64 delivers its plot through minimal dialogue, bare-bones NPC interactions, and almost no cutscenes. There's no party system, no real character development, and no major plot twists. It feels like an RPG missing its middle and final acts. What makes this lack of story even more glaring is that the RPG genre is usually driven by immersive worlds and character arcs. In Quest 64, you're dropped into a series of towns and dungeons that all feel disconnected. NPCs shout generic lines, and towns are devoid of any personality. There's no lore to uncover, no memorable characters to befriend, and nothing to emotionally invest in. It's a game that actively avoids engaging with a player. It's like, I'm not talking to you. No, we're not telling you anything about this world. No. You can't even find it yourself. Unlucky, you're on your own. The gameplay is centered around a turn-based battle system with elemental magic. Brian, still hilarious, can collect spirits scattered around the world to increase his proficiency in 4 elemental schools: fire, water, earth, and wind. While this mechanic is promising, it's shallow in execution. Most spells are either underpowered or so strong they break the balance. Enemy variety is low, and battles quickly become repetitive button-mashing affairs. The battle system also takes place in a small grid, allowing some positioning, but there's very little strategy involved. You'll spend most fights either casting the same spells over and over, or using hit-and-run tactics that don't change from early game to late game. Boss battles are especially dull, as most boil down to standing at a distance and spamming your most powerful spell. One of the most frustrating elements is the lack of traditional leveling system. Instead, your stats increase based on actions performed in battle. Take damage to raise HP, use magic to increase MP, and so on. While this sounds imaginative, it leads to bizarre grinding sessions where you intentionally take hits or cast weak spells just to raise stats. It's a mechanic that punishes normal play and rewards tedium. Do we all not remember the horrors of Final Fantasy II? And if you've not heard that episode of the podcast, I believe you should go check that out. Graphically, Quest 64 does at least offer some charm. The environments are bright and colourful, and there's a pleasant fairy tale aesthetic to the towns and forests. But the character models are really simplistic, with animations being terrible and dungeons all just feel copy-paste. There's little sense of wonder or mystery here, and the camera is often your worst enemy, swinging around awkwardly and obscuring your view like he's had a few too many tequilas. The music is serviceable but forgettable. It just lacks the emotional hit like its contemporaries of Final Fantasy or Chrono Cross. The sound effects are also minimal, and there's no voice acting at all. Combined with the silent protagonist and sparse dialogue, the game often feels like a lonely, sterile experience. Critics were lukewarm at release, praising the graphics and simplicity, but slamming the lack of depth. Players who had hoped for a rich N64 RPG were left disillusioned. Many pointed out how the game felt rushed and unfinished, more like a tech demo than a full-fledged title. It was equally disappointing given how rare RPGs were on the system. Today, Quest 64 is remembered for what it could have been for what it actually was. While it did introduce some young players to RPG mechanics, it failed to deliver on any of the game's core strengths. It's a cautionary tale about rushing to fill a market gap without the design quality to back it up, and a quest that led straight to mediocrity. And that is it! 7 of the worst games for the N64 Part 2. As said at the beginning of the show, if there are ones that I've missed, please let them know, and if you have played any of these, let me know your memories and your history with the game. As I said, if you do think I deserve it, please hit that like and subscribe button. We're trying to get our way to 6,000 subscribers. But until then, I'll see you again in 3 days for another video. My name's been Danny, take care of yourself, bye bye.